Hi, welcome to the Glow Zoomcast. Today we have Julie Tobi with us. She is the creator of the Birth Journal and a career coach for creative entrepreneurs. Julie and I connected a couple years ago right after we launched the Birth Deck, and we immediately connected not only because we both went to the University of Michigan, obviously go Blue, but also because we both feel really, really strongly that the birth experience and processing the birth experience over a course of days, weeks, and years afterwards is something that can be profoundly important, valuable for not only your experience, but also for your kids. And I'm so excited to have her on today. Thank you so much for being here, Julie.
You're welcome. I love whenever I get to talk with you, so I'm super excited.
It does feel like this is a long time coming. I don't know if we've ever actually talked to each other on FaceTime.
I don't think we have.
Which is kind of funny. And also it's so weird because social media makes me feel like I know you. I'm like, I've seen pictures of you a lot. So I feel like I picture you talking when you're talking to me on the phone. But yeah, so tell me, Julie, what is happening for you? Let's do like a little quarantine overview. You are a mother of 3 now.
Yep.
What's happening? Talk to us.
Okay, so I have an almost 8-year-old, a 4.5-year-old, and a 5-month-old baby, which is super fun, and it's super wild and crazy and all the things. So we are home all the time, and I'm working from home, obviously, so is my husband, and we just manage the best we can. I have to say it's not super horrible. Like, I'll be honest, like there are times when I'm like a little bit crazy and there are lots of toys on the floor and things like that. But like overall, like I like being home. Am I happy there's a pandemic? No, absolutely not. But for the most part, like we're managing really well and the kids love each other for the most part. And it's manageable.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm finding that after like moving into our 3rd month of quarantine, and I guess now we're sort of like right in the middle of our 3rd month, I'm feeling the same way. We've reached a new normal. I've gone through all the stages of grief. Right now I'm in a kind of acceptance and moving into what is feeling like it's going to be an interminable just experience of togetherness, and I'm also not really minding it. It's cool. Like there are these little moments that we would never have otherwise. Like even if my husband and I are both sort of working at different points during the day, that we both get to be there when our 2.5-year-old wakes up from a nap. That would never happen normally, and that's just sweet moments. So I've been really trying to appreciate those little moments that feel like little gifts amongst and amidst all of this, all of the anxiety and the craziness. How is it impacting your creative process being surrounded by family and by people all the time right now?
Yeah, I think what's the trickiest is the time piece, and not just that the kind of cliche of like, I don't have the time, but I don't feel like I'm in control of my time because I don't have breaks without my children, and I'm most creative in the morning. And so what I find will happen, and it's really frustrating, is in the morning and kind of through like early afternoon, I have all these ideas and I'm like jotting them in my phone and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this later. And when the kids go to bed, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And then the kids go to bed and I'm tired. And then that creative energy, I feel like it's just kind of like drifted away. So I have to really try to find moments where I can kind of take little bits of time. So what helps me is to think, when and where can I find 20 minutes? And sometimes I can't, but it's like when I can, I have to take them. Whether it's like an Instagram post or a paragraph of what will become a blog post instead of a full post. So it's like working with what I've got from a time perspective.
I absolutely relate to that. I just wrote an article and it was over 1,000 words. And I thought, what have I done even pitching this? Once it was accepted, I was like, yes, oh shit. And so I sat down and I mapped out my time in these little blocks of time. And I knew, okay, this is how many words I got to get done in each one of these windows. And it all came together when normally I would say, okay, I got an 8-hour block. We're just going to power through. That was not what was going to happen this time. When you say that you have 3 kids, your kids are spaced apart enough that you have been able to process each of their births separately as you've gone through the process of having your 3 children. What was this last birth like?
So it's interesting you say that, and I immediately got goosebumps because I'm like love, love, love birth stories. And what I found so interesting with each of them is that, and then I'll kind of get into the third one, is that I found how I processed all of them was in relation to either the upcoming birth or the prior birth. So I have a hard time, for better or worse, looking at them in isolation. And so my third birth, especially by all accounts, was like really great and lovely. But, and I hate even saying this out loud, but there are parts of it that weren't as lovely as
Mhm.
my second birth. And so even in labor, in active labor, I was having myself comparing to the prior birth. So to explain that a little bit more, my birth with my son, who is my second, was like a dream. It was like an unplanned water birth, like who even has that, right? And it was beautiful and it was calm and it was peaceful. And my midwife put flameless candles around the perimeter of the tub and the lights were low. And he came out after like 3 pushes. And I mean, it was intense too. So it wasn't just this like fairyland. I think a little bit of time is making me think about it in only like rainbows, right? It was really intense, but it was so beautiful. And I felt really peaceful about it. So then with my third, which was just 5 months ago, and I feel like I haven't fully processed it, I'm still kind of working through that a bit. What I found was I was comparing my birth with her to the births of the prior two. So with my daughter, who was my first, when we could see the head, she was my first. I didn't know. They're like, we see the head. I'm like, great. She's like, gotta be ready to like fall out. And no, I pushed for like another solid 75 minutes. And so for me, I was like, no, like I thought it was going to be faster than that. So for this third birth, I felt like my daughter, I had a girl for the third. I felt like she was so close and she really was. But I found myself playing mind games with myself and almost saying, but I thought my first was close and she wasn't. So what if right now I feel like she's close and she's not? And I think that was giving me a bit of anxiety and really impacted me. Where in hindsight, I wish that I could have just been in the moment and been kind of zen and like she'll come when she comes and I'm going to ride these contractions and like we'll get there together. And we did all of that, but that's not where I was here. Up here, I was like, what if this takes forever? I can't do this forever. I just want her out. So that was
Yeah.
kind of the biggest part for me in it being like my third.
And that kind of mental vortex that is a little bit of anxiety mixed in with it will increase adrenaline and will actually slow labor down. So the inability to be fully present in labor can also take us out of our most efficient hormonal state for labor, which is trusting, relaxed, present, sort of in the flow of the contractions that are happening at that time. But it happens to all of us. In my first labor, I stalled for 2 hours at 8.5 centimeters because I freaked out about the prospect of my whole life changing and becoming a mother. And I all of a sudden realized that I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to run my business and be a parent in the way that I wanted to be. And I was 8.5 centimeters dilated and I'd been in labor for, 20 hours at this point. And it just totally stalled me out for 2 hours until I got my head right. It's an amazing thing what that kind of thinking can do, that the idea of like problem solving in labor and trying to anticipate and look back can be thwarting in the whole process. That's really interesting. So you talk to us about how you came to write the birth journal, because in speaking with you, one of the things that's so interesting is that you're not a birth worker. You're not a doula. You're not a birth educator. You're not a lactation consultant. And so many people who are in the birth field, whether it's their core profession or they're involved more tangentially, have been inspired by birth, but also are involved in birth on a professional level actively every day. So tell us about how your inspiration for the birth journal and what it's all about.
Yeah. So in hindsight, I realized that my mom always talked about her birth stories. So I knew little snippets of my birth story, of my brothers, who they're twins and they're older than I am, and I have a younger sister. So my mom just always casually, like around our birthdays, or if someone in the family had a baby, she would just talk about her, experiences giving birth. And I always liked hearing about it. And I didn't fully recognize that part of it when I created the birth journal, because the reason why I created it is because I'll give you a little bit of backstory about how I wrote my birth story. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, I became obsessed with birth stories. And I call it Ina May's pink book, but Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. Whenever I tell people who are pregnant, I'm like, it's the pink one, get the pink book. There are birth stories in there, and I devoured them. And what I loved was that those birth stories really helped me realize, like, okay, like you got this, like you can birth a baby. Like women have been doing this forever. Animals do it. I found comfort even in that. I was picturing cows like birthing babies when I was in active labor with my daughter. I'm like, damn it, those cows, like they don't know that they could get an epidural. They just do it. They're just out there in that field. They get that calf out. So that helped me so much, just kind of connecting with the like biological experience of it. So I knew I would write my birth stories. And so when my daughter was born, my first, I kind of had in my head, like, okay, like get that story out. And so when I got my birth story out of here, I sat at my computer and I typed it out, and I almost felt like I was writing a historical document. It was like, at this time, and then this, and then this. And it felt really um, not inspired. Like I wasn't connected to it the way that I am when I tell someone my birth story. Like think about when you're sitting with a girlfriend or your mom and you're telling them about your birth experience, you're like animated, and then I did this, or you're crying or whatever it is. And I didn't have that experience typing it. I like picture myself like doing this at like our counter bar area in our kitchen. Um, and so then I was thinking about this was a couple years later after my daughter was born, a gift for my cousin who was having a baby. And I thought about like a gift basket for her. And I was like, oh, you know what? I should put a journal in there so that she can write her birth story. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like I should write mine. And then I just had this like, I don't know if you've ever read Big Magic, but this like creative moment where it was like this idea came into me and I had to harness it and do something with it. And I realized that I wanted to share my birth stories with my kids, like my mom had shared hers with me. And the way that I had captured it, I would have had to like log into a word processing document, print it out, staple that puppy, and be like, here, sweetie, read a document that explains the day that you were born. And I was like, I want something more meaningful and beautiful. So it really came from wanting to kind of share that experience with my daughter. And then I really wanted for me to enjoy the process of writing it. And I think there's so much power in handwriting. I could recognize my mom's handwriting anywhere. Like I've saved photographs that my grandma wrote the date on the back, because I'm like, she touched that photo paper. Her hand went across the back of that photo when she wrote 1947, And I think our handwriting is so powerful and can connect us in a really beautiful way, that all of that just kind of like came together for me in creating the birth journal.
Absolutely. I love that. It feels like you're really giving somebody a gift, not just a documentation of a series of facts and circumstances. And I think that it is, I mean, you really created an heirloom quality product. The book is bound with linen cloth, and it has gold foil embossed writing on the front, and it says the birth journal. And to give one of those to each child would be such a special thing. My mother-in-law hand embroidered and cross-stitched these bags for each one of the children to carry their talit in. We're Jewish, and it's like your shawl that you get when you are bar mitzvahed at 13 and sort of become an adult in the community. And each one of those bags is so special. And every time I hold my husband's talit bag, I can really feel her love in that. And she uses the term from the land of mother love. And I love that idea. It's like not from a PC, it's from the land of mother love, you know? So I just think that's so special. What is different about the birth journal than just a regular old lined book, regular old lined journal?
Yeah, so I know that for a lot of women, and even myself, sometimes when I would think about it in the beginning, it can be overwhelming to think about writing your birth story. Because it's like, well, what do I include? How much detail? How little detail? Where do I start? What are the elements of it? And ultimately, it doesn't matter. You can write it however you want, but the beginning of the journal is a guided portion. So it's not fill in the blank. Like I don't have things like, my water broke at, for you to fill in the time. Like I don't have those types of prompts. I have more like, look, this is how to approach writing your birth story. Approach it from this beautiful space of from free writing, from connecting with the experience. And I do give like guided ideas of maybe you want to include this. Maybe you're the type of person who is detailed and you want to know the time on the clock in the car when you got in. If that's not your style, then don't include that. So it's really giving women permission to write however they want and whatever they want, but not completely in a way that might be overwhelming by having no guidance whatsoever.
How have you heard that the birth journal and the activities involved in crafting the birth story and in really going through the birth story and finding your own voice, how has that impacted people who have had maybe traumatic birth experiences or who have had confusing birth experiences that they really aren't sure how to process?
Yeah, I think, and that came up a lot too when I was creating it because I had a traumatic birth experience with my daughter that I didn't fully process until 3 weeks before my son was born. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I have not fully worked through this. So there is a little portion at the end of the guided portion of the journal that's like about writing after birth trauma. And ultimately, write when you're ready. I don't kind of push people to say, you've got to get this down. Like, you know, you have to work through this story. Like most of the time people know when they're ready to write it. But I found that journaling, from what people have told me, their traumatic birth experience helps with healing. And even if not traumatic, but a lot of people, their birth experience doesn't go how they expected or how they wanted, or there are parts that they don't have peace with. So
Mm-hmm.
it gives them space to try to kind of create a little bit of peace for themselves, and to write it out, because there might be things that you don't want to freely share, or that you, for the first time, you don't want to kind of say it out loud, but you're comfortable writing it. And it gives people the space to do that. And people have told me that there really is healing in writing about the trauma. And we know that to be true from science, right? Journaling can be effective to work through any type of trauma. And so it applies to the birth story, kind of like a traumatic birth story as well.
I think that's so important. I've heard the term keeping your grief warm, and it's something I've been talking about a lot, especially over the last few months that we've all been in quarantine. There are a lot of people who are having birth experiences that are not what they are dreaming that they're going to be. And so going into birth, it's important to recognize that you might have an experience that doesn't match your fantasy or your dream or your plan, but that you will be able to work through that and to process that in time. And part of doing that is making sure that that the grief, the trauma, or even just the dissatisfaction and the sadness, if we don't want to use such intense words, or maybe we're not identifying that negatively with it. It just wasn't, it was lackluster, cold, something like that, that you have to keep that memory close and you have to keep it warm, because if you don't, it can actually sort of harden and calcify, and then it starts to become toxic if it's within you. Sorry, there's a jet overhead. Totally normal. It's just a fighter jet. It's normal. And that if it is something that you don't actually work through, that's when it becomes something that is. You hear how loud this is? Oh, it's literally like right. It's like an F-18.
Give them a wave up there.
It's so crazy. So I'm in San Diego right now. This is just a little aside for all the listeners out there, all the watchers. I'm in San Diego right now, and this is talking about adapting to different environments. I grew up here. I normally live in New York City. Growing up here, there are fighter jets that fly overhead a few times a day, sometimes many times a day, because this is a military town. We have the Marine Corps, we have Navy here, and we have Air Force here. And that sound to me sounds like home.
Oh, wow.
Which is so weird. And also so weird because if I heard fighter jets and hadn't always lived in peacetime in my own environment, right? Like if I was on the other side of the world having a different experience with fighter jets, then it would be a completely different trigger, which is just always so interesting to me, because some people, hi honey, because some people will be, that's great, thank you. We're homeschooling too. You did, good focusing.
Hi, how are you?
We'll talk more about this later, okay, babe?
How are you?
This is Julie Tobi. She wrote the birth journal.
Hi.
How are you?
Okay, so, bye, honey. Go find Mima. So yeah, it's kind of a funny thing, like just talking about even how we process different memories and like what different things trigger. So, so by keeping your grief warm, what you can do is then you can work through it. So it becomes something that is not going to like calcify, harden, and then become toxic to you later on, because those things never go away. If you just keep shoving them further and farther away, they become less approachable and harder to actually process. So I think that journaling about a birth, even though it might be the last thing that you want to do, if you are confused by it, if it didn't go as you wanted, or you have something that's really hard to work through, that writing about it is the most important thing. And I love that you give a format for it, that you give inspiration for it, and that it is actually in itself a really beautiful artifact, something to carry on.
Yeah, that was important to me because I wanted it to be something that could sit on the bookshelf in a baby room, that you could like hold down the line as an adult. Like I think if my mom had written her birth stories in this journal and gave it to me, I would cry to have this like beautiful journal that I knew was quality, that I could hold and keep and touch. Like I would love it. I would love it so much.
Yeah, I could totally agree. I think it's such a special gift to give to your children. And I'm so glad that you created it. Now, Julie, tell me where we can get the birth journal.
Yep. So thebirthjournal.com is the website where you can buy it. And then you could find me on Instagram at thebirthjournal.
Awesome.
There it is.
That's great. And I just also want to mention that you and I early on decided that we should put them together as a package. And so you can actually get the birth deck and the birth journal on both of our websites. And it's such a perfect package because you have the instructions on how to best support somebody in labor. And then you also have something to process whatever does happen in labor. So it's the perfect bookends to the birth experience, prepping and then processing. So we love birth. We love supporting people in labor and afterwards. And I'm so glad that we had a chance to have this conversation today, Julie. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Me too. We'll have to do it again.
I would obviously love that. Bye.
Bye.